My father lifted his glass and smiled the smile he used when he wanted a room to like him more than it liked the truth. So he said, tapping the rim with a fingernail, "You just teach flight simulators." A ripple of polite laughter moved through the country club like wind across wheat. I smiled back steady. "No," I said, "I fly real aircraft." He laughed louder, pleased with himself. "Oh, then what's your call sign?" I didn't raise my voice. "Night Sentinel." The man beside him, a retired SEAL, spat red wine across the white linen and went pale. He started, then stopped. He knew exactly who I was. The silence that followed had texture. It pressed against the skin the way humidity does before a storm breaks heavy and expectant. A spoon clinked a glass somewhere behind me. The band, halfway through a careful standard, lost the beat and found it again like a man pretending nothing happened when everything did. My father stood there, glass midair, eyebrows lifted in a question he hadn't expected anyone to answer. The room had been arranged for comfort, round tables, linen crisp as folded letters, candlelight calibrated to flatter. People came here to be seen, agreeing with one another. The laughter he'd counted on had been currency, and he'd already spent it. He recovered first. He always did. "That's a good one," he said, aiming for charm and landing near confusion. "Night what?" He glanced around, searching for permission to laugh again. I didn't give it to him. The SEAL Tom, I would later learn, though everyone called him by his last name, set his napkin down with the care of a man who understands lines. "Sir," he said, and the word carried. "That's not a joke." He looked at me, not for approval exactly, but alignment. Then back at my father. "You don't ask that name unless you're ready to hear the answer." My father's jaw worked. He took a sip of wine, more to occupy his mouth than because he wanted it, and swallowed wrong. A red spray dotted the cloth like a map no one wanted to read. Someone reached for a napkin. Someone else pretended to check their phone. The band stopped altogether. We were at the Hastings Club, the kind of place that smells faintly of lemon polish and money that learned to whisper. It was a charity dinner, veteran scholarships, a cause no one argues with, and my father loved it for the way it made him look benevolent by proximity. He'd arrived late, of course. He always did when punctuality would have suggested deference. His suit shone a little too much at the elbows. His tie argued with itself. I had chosen my dress with the same care I chose my words: navy unadorned shoes, polished but practical. Years of rooms like this had taught me a simple rule. If you don't want to be measured, don't give them a ruler. My hair was pinned back the way I pin it for long nights. Habit is a kind of armor. "Simulators," my father repeated, finding his footing. "That's what she does. Teaches kids to push buttons." He chuckled, warming to the sound of his own certainty. "All very important, of course." Tom's chair scraped softly as he turned. "With respect," he said, and the phrase did what it's meant to do. When used correctly, it made space. "She doesn't teach kids." The room leaned without knowing it had moved. I felt my pulse in my throat, not from fear, but from the old math of exposure. My father had always liked to tell my story for me. It saved him the trouble of listening. For years, I'd let him. Invisibility has advantages. Tonight, it was losing its usefulness. A woman across the table, Pearl's careful hair tilted her head. "Night Sentinel." She repeated, tasting it. "Is that Air Force?" Tom didn't answer her. He kept his eyes on my father. "It's earned," he said. "It's not something you hand around at dinner." My father laughed again, a short bark that tried to break the moment into something manageable. "Come on," he said. "We're all friends here." Friends. The word has a way of meaning different things to different people. To my father, it meant audience. I set my glass down. The stem made a small, decisive sound against the table. "Dad," I said, and didn't soften it. "Please." He looked at me, then really looked as if seeing a stranger who shared my face. "Please what?" he asked. "Please stop," I said. Not loud, not angry, not tonight. The band leader cleared his throat. The MC, a man who made a living guiding rooms back from edges, took a step forward, smile ready. Tom lifted a hand just an inch. The MC froze. "Sir," Tom said again, and there was no mistaking the respect now. "Your daughter flew Overwatch for my team. Nights when the sky disappears and the ground lies. Nights when radios go quiet. She kept watch so we could move." He paused, measuring. "She brought people home." The room breathed in as one and forgot to breathe out. My father's face rearranged itself. The smile tried to come back and couldn't find a place to sit. "That's dramatic," he said weakly. "It's accurate," Tom replied, "and it's enough." A waiter moved, then stopped, caught between pores. The candles guttered. I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to fill the space, to make it easier for everyone by making myself smaller. Years of training had burned that reflex down to embers. Quit professionalism, they call it. Do the work. Speak when necessary. Let truth hold its own weight. I met my father's eyes. There was confusion there and something else I hadn't seen before, fear of being wrong in front of witnesses. Power doesn't like witnesses. "I didn't come to correct anyone's biography," I said, "because someone had to speak, and it might as well be me." I came to support a good cause. I lifted my glass just enough to give the room a task. To the students who'll get a chance they didn't expect. People stood because standing is what you do when you don't know what else to do. Glasses clinked. The band found a key and stayed in it. The MC exhaled and smiled like a man whose bridge hadn't collapsed. My father sat. He stared at the stain on the cloth as if it were the problem. When he looked up again, his voice had lost its swagger. "Night Sentinel," he said, testing the words. "Since when?" I didn't answer. Some questions aren't owed answers in public. Tom leaned back. The crisis passed for him. "You raised someone steady," he said, not unkindly. "That counts." My father nodded without looking at me. He nodded at the idea of himself. As the room restarted, forks finding plates, conversation stepping gingerly back into motion, I felt the shift settle. It wasn't triumph, it was redistribution. The story had moved to where it belonged, and the room had adjusted its furniture around it. Across the table, the woman with pearls touched my arm. "Thank you for your service," she said, eyes bright. I nodded because sometimes gratitude is a gift you receive without opening. My father didn't speak again that night. He left early muttering about traffic. His empty chair was louder than his jokes had been. I stayed. I always do. You don't leave a room just because it learned something about you. You let it live with the lesson. The drive home was quiet. The city thinned into roads that remembered tires. My phone buzzed once. No message, just a missed call. I didn't check it. Some reckonings need daylight. By morning, the story had already begun to travel the way these things do, softly at first, then with confidence, like it had always belonged to the town. I didn't read the messages. Made coffee and watched steam rise from the mug, thin and patient. Outside, a sparrow bullied a bigger bird off the feeder and won. Size, I've learned, is a poor predictor of outcome. I grew up in a place where people keep mental ledgers. Who paid what? Who gained weight? Who left and came back? Our house sat just off a 2-lane road that cut through cornfields in ambition in equal measure. My father ran a small contracting outfit out of a block building behind the garage. Copper and dust lived in his clothes. He was good with systems, pipes, wires, schedules. People were another matter. He believed humor was a solvent. If something hurt, you laughed it down. If someone flinched, that was proof they needed toughening. "Builds character," he'd say. And the men around him would nod because nodding is easier than objecting when the joke isn't aimed at you. By 5th grade, I was tall and solid, not clumsy, just present in a way that invited commentary. My mother tried to intercept the remarks with casseroles and deflection. She loved me out loud. He cut me down in public. Those forces canceled each other out until I felt like zero. On Sundays, we sat beneath stained glass, wheat and water pouring color onto the pews. The pastor spoke of grace. In the parking lot, my father would squeeze my upper arm like he was checking a melon and say, "We're laying off the donuts this week, right?" The men laughed. The women looked away. Humiliation loves a parking lot. I learned early that invisibility was safety. If I couldn't be pretty, I could be useful. I swept the shop. I stacked parts. I balanced invoices on a yellow legal pad. He relied on my neatness while ridiculing my body. "You'd be perfect if you came with a shutoff valve." He told a supplier once like it was a compliment. I pretended not to hear. I always pretended. In high school, I ran cross country in an oversized t-shirt. My times were average. I liked the private victory of steady pace, no applause, just breath and grit. A guidance counselor slid a brochure across her desk during senior year, aviation. "You're organized." She said, "And stubborn. Those go far." My father laughed when I brought it up at dinner. "You'll quit the first time someone yells," he said, chewing with his mouth open. "You can't even handle a hill run." My mother pressed her napkin to her lips. Silence in our house was always the safest answer. I signed papers on my lunch break and hid the copies in my geometry binder. The day I left, my father stood with his thumbs in his belt loops like a foreman of the world. "Try not to embarrass us," he said. Lifted my bag and didn't look back. Training likes neatness and stubbornness. So did I. The cadence in my head changed from my father's voice to an instructor's bark, and somehow that felt like mercy. The instructor didn't know my history or my body. He cared about checklists, headings, weather. I could work with that. Work is a refuge when your worth has always been contested. I didn't tell my father what I flew or where or why. Partly because of security, mostly because I was tired of auditions. If he couldn't be proud without conditions, I'd stop offering him the chance to reject me. I showed up to holidays in plain clothes, never mentioning nights spent above deserts or water, watching the ground for movement that didn't belong. To him, I was the daughter who never quite measured up. The phone buzzed again. This time I checked it. A single text from my father. "We need to talk." No punctuation. That's how I knew it mattered. I waited until afternoon. Let the light move. Let the town metabolize its surprise. At the diner, the waitress added an extra slice of bacon to my plate and pretended she hadn't. An older man at the counter cleared his throat and said, "Ma'am," like it was a flag. I nodded back. There are handshakes that don't require hands. I drove to the shop at dusk. The roll-up door was half open. A radio played classic country soft enough to be embarrassed about. He sat on a stool with a ledger open pencil clenched like he was threatening the numbers into place. "You're open," I said. "Always," he said without looking up. I stood where the oil smell was strongest. "We should talk." He set the pencil down with exaggerated care. "We talked enough last night." "No," I said. "You talked, then other people did. I'd like to speak now." He rubbed his jaw. "It was a joke." "Jokes are supposed to be funny to the person who hears them," I said, "not just the person who tells them." He stared at the ledger. The fan rattled. Silence held us like old rope. "You never said what you do," he said finally. "You never asked," I said. "You filled the blanks with the story you preferred," he sniffed. "Flying's just a job." "It is," I said. "And so is fatherhood." That one landed. He looked older without chandeliers. There was no stage light to lie for him here. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to stop," I said. "Not just the big performances, the small cuts, the way you turn me into a punchline." He shifted on the stool. "What if I can't? Then we'll see each other less," I said. "I won't bring myself where I'm not respected." He nodded once sharp, like he was taking a measurement. "You got hard. I got clear," I said. He thumbed the ledger's edge. "Night Sentinel," he said, quieter. "What does that even mean?" "It means you keep watch so others can sleep," I said. "That's all." He closed the ledger and pushed it aside. When he stood, it was slow, cautious, like a man surprised by the floor. "There's a service Saturday," he said. "Veterans Memorial. I could stand there with you." I nodded. "Okay." Saturday was bright in that Midwest way, the sky apologizing for winters. We stood near the back while names were read. An older Marine saluted with a hand that trembled and a jaw that didn't. My father didn't interrupt. He didn't translate me into smaller words. When someone asked, "That your girl?" He lifted his chin. Yes, it wasn't poetry. It was enough. Later at his truck, he said, "I've been mean my whole life." "You've been afraid," I said. "Mean is how afraid dresses for work," he grunted. "You going to fix me now?" "I can draw a line," I said. "You walk across." He nodded. A week later, he came by with tomatoes from a neighbor's garden and asked if I had salt. He opened the screen door slowly so it wouldn't slam. Consideration is a dialect. I'll take it. The thing about a call sign is that it isn't chosen for how it sounds. It arrives the way weather does after conditions line up and something survives them. You don't announce it, you earn it, and then you try to forget it so it doesn't harden into vanity. Vanity gets people killed. I learned that early. My path into aviation wasn't cinematic. There were no trumpets. There were forms, medicals, interviews conducted in rooms that smelled faintly of coffee and institutional carpet. There were instructors who cared less about my reasons than my reactions. How do you correct? How do you recover? How you decide when the instruments disagree with your gut? Those questions tell more truth than any speech. I flew trainer's first clean, honest aircraft that forgive mistakes just enough to teach you, not to make them again. I learned the grammar of air the way some people learn a second language, awkwardly at first, then with the quiet confidence of someone who knows which rules can bend and which will break you. Crosswinds taught humility. Night taught patience. Weather taught respect. The first time I flew at night over open water, the horizon disappeared. There is a moment when the world becomes a bowl of ink and you realize how much of flying is faith disciplined by procedure. You trust the instruments. You trust the checklist. You trust the training drilled into muscle memory. You do not trust the voice that says, "You're fine, relax." That voice lies. I didn't tell my father about any of it. I wrote home in neutral sentences. "I'm well. Training is demanding. The food's fine." My mother mailed me clippings about my cousin's promotions and new trucks. I wrote back, "Tell them I'm proud." It was easier to keep the ledger balanced by not entering my own numbers. Advanced training came later, and with it the kind of flying that doesn't invite spectators. The aircraft changed. The nights lengthened. The maps grew teeth. I learned to read the ground by absence, where lights should be and weren't, where a line was too straight to be natural. I learned to hold position when everything in you wants to move, to wait, to watch. There's a rhythm to operations that doesn't make the movies. Long hours of nothing punctuated by minutes where everything matters. You learn to speak in half sentences that carry weight. You learn that calm is contagious. You learn that fear can be useful if it sharpens instead of scatters. The night that earned the name wasn't dramatic in the retelling. It never is. A team had gone long. Comms went thin, then quiet. Weather was turning. The kind of weather that erases mistakes by making them fatal. I took station and stayed there. Hours passed. Fuel math became prayer. The ground offered suggestions that weren't friendly. I remember thinking about my hands, how ordinary they looked on the controls, how they'd stacked parts in a shop once, how they'd held a pencil over a ledger. Same hands, different stakes. We kept watch. We didn't chase ghosts. We waited for the pattern to tell on itself. When the team moved, we moved with them, a shadow that knew when not to touch the light. They came back thin and tired and alive. Alive is the only metric that matters. The name came later, offhand, the way these things do. Someone said it in a debrief like a fact. Someone else nodded. I didn't correct them. I didn't repeat it. I went back to work. That's the part people miss. The work goes on. There are checklists to complete, logs to sign, aircraft to hand over to maintenance crews who will never get enough credit. There are young pilots to correct gently so they'll listen the next time. There are decisions you carry home and set down carefully so they don't break your sleep. I kept the name out of my house, out of family gatherings, out of the stories my father told, because stories are handles and he had a habit of grabbing hard. When I came home, I hung my flight jacket on a hook by the door and became someone else. Jeans, soft sweaters, a person who blended. The less he knew, the less he could use. Years passed this way. Promotions arrive gradually, the way dawn does if you're paying attention. I learned to keep my voice level in rooms full of men who'd learned to measure authority by volume. I learned that there is a kind of leadership that doesn't announce itself. It simply refuses to be miscounted. I flew with people who could break down radios blindfolded, who recited psalms before takeoff, who called their mothers on borrowed phones when time allowed. They didn't need me thin. They needed me steady. In that steadiness, I found a dignity I could stand inside. When my mother's health faltered, I flew home in whatever I was wearing because there was no time to change. At the hospital, a nurse asked about my job. Before I could answer, my father said, "She teaches." He said it the way you put a lid on a pot. I let him. I always had. At the memorial service the following year, an older veteran shook my hand and said, "We had someone watching over us once. Nights like that don't forget you." My father stood beside me and stared at the names carved into stone. He didn't ask. He didn't joke. Silence has many dialects. Back at the club that night, the night the name left my mouth in a room that wasn't ready for it, I watched Tom navigate the aftermath with the ease of someone who has seen worse. People came to him for confirmation. He gave none. He pointed at me once and said, "Ask her," and then walked away. That mattered. That I didn't give details. I never do. The truth doesn't need embroidery. It needs boundaries. When my father asked later what it meant, I told him the part that could be carried without damage. You keep watch so others can sleep. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe he just recognized the shape of responsibility when he saw it. The morning after the service, I stood in my kitchen and listened to the house wake. Pipes clicked. A truck passed. The ordinary held. I realized something then that I hadn't let myself think before. The name hadn't changed who I was. It had only clarified where I stood. That clarity would be tested again, not in the air, but across a table. The hardest landings I've learned happen at home. Dinner resumed the way rivers do, after a stone unevenly at first. Then, with a practiced insistence that forward is the only acceptable direction, forks found plates, glasses filled and emptied. Laughter returned in careful increments, tested like ice. People spoke a little softer. Humor, having failed once now, asked permission before entering the room. My father did not speak. He sat with his shoulders, set eyes moving from the stain on the linen to the candle flame, back again as if those were safer subjects than the person across from him. When he did look up, it was with the expression of a man searching for instructions that weren't there. The script he'd relied on, tease, deflect, charm, had been removed without replacement. Tom drifted away from our table, a tactful retreat that did him credit. He had done what he came to do, though I doubted he'd known it when he arrived. People stopped him anyway, the way they do when they want to touch certainty. He nodded, deflected, redirected. He refused to perform. That mattered too. Across the room, the MC leaned toward me with the practiced smile of a man who has learned that bridges are built one plank at a time. "Would you like to say a few words?" He asked quiet enough to keep it from becoming a dare. I shook my head once. "Not necessary," I said, and it wasn't, not yet. My father's friends, men who had laughed easily at his jokes for years, suddenly found their napkins fascinating. One of them cleared his throat. Another adjusted his cufflinks. The room had learned something about itself, and like all lessons learned in public, it required a period of rearrangement. A woman at the next table leaned over. "Night Sentinel," she said. "Careful. Is that dangerous?" "It's work," I said. "So is being a good neighbor." She smiled, relieved by the ordinary shape of the answer. People prefer danger when it wears a costume. Responsibility is harder to applaud. When the band began again, something with a backbone familiar enough to be safe, the sound stitched the room together. Couples stood. A few brave souls found the dance floor. Motion helps when you're trying to believe things have returned to normal. They hadn't. Not really. Power had moved quietly the way it does when it decides not to announce itself. My father felt it. I could see him registering the absence of laughter, the lack of reinforcement. He drank water instead of wine. His hand shook just enough to catch the light. Later, as plates were cleared and the evening leaned toward its end, he stood and approached me. No glass this time. No audience he could count on. You could have told me, he said low. I could have, I agreed. You could have asked. He frowned. I didn't think. That's the problem, I said not unkindly. You thought you knew. He opened his mouth, closed it. The band slid into a slower number. A couple brushed past us, murmuring apologies. The room had given us a pocket of privacy without meaning to. What happens now? He asked. We finished dinner, I said. We go home. Tomorrow looks like tomorrow. He nodded, dissatisfied. He wanted an ending he could understand. I wasn't ready to give him one. Outside, the air had cooled. The parking lot glittered with chrome and intention. My father paused by his car, keys in hand. Night, Sentinel. He said again, trying the words like a tool he didn't own. Since when? I met his eyes long enough. He exhaled. You embarrassed me. I was embarrassed, I said. For years. He flinched. That was new. We drove separate ways. I took the long route home, the one that passes the river and the old grain elevator, the one that gives you time to feel your way back into yourself. At a red light, my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Thank you for keeping watch. No signature, no need. The days that followed were a study in aftermath. The town metabolized the event with the efficiency of small places, quickly, loudly, with witnesses. At the hardware store, a man I'd known since childhood tipped his cap and said, ma'am, like it was a decision. At church, a woman pressed my hand and whispered, my son flies. Pride and fear share a border. My father did not call. On the third day, I decided to go to him, not because I owed him anything, but because avoidance has a way of turning into something that looks like consent. The shop smelled the same oil dust, the sweet tang of solvents. He sat at the bench radio murmuring. When I stepped inside, he didn't look up. You're here, he said. I am, I said. He set his wrench down. People are talking. They always are. He rubbed his hands together as if warming them. They say you're some kind of hero. I do my job, I said. He nodded, unsatisfied again. You could have corrected me. In front of everyone, I asked. I asked you to stop. He stared at the wall where a calendar hung months out of date. I didn't hear you. I know, I said. That's what I'm saying. Silence stretched. The radio crackled. Outside a truck passed. I don't like being wrong, he said finally. No one does, I said. But being wrong isn't the worst thing. What is? He asked. Being cruel, I said, and calling it humor. He swallowed. The word had landed where it was meant to. I you to understand something, I continued. What you said wasn't a one-off. It was a pattern, and patterns require boundaries. He looked at me, then really looked. You gonna cut me off? If you keep cutting me, I said, yes. He nodded slow. I don't know how to talk without joking. Then learn, I said, or say less. He considered that the way a tradesman considers a new tool, suspicious, curious, aware it might change the work. There's a service Saturday, he said at last. Veterans Memorial, names, flags. He hesitated. You could stand with me. I can, I said, if you can stand with me. He met my eyes and for once didn't look away. I can try. Trying isn't everything, but it's a start. As I left, he called after me, Night Sentinel. I turned. He nodded once, like a man marking a measurement. No joke, no audience, just the word placed where it belonged. The hardest flights I've learned aren't the ones that scare you. They're the ones that require you to change how you land. Saturday arrived clear and undecided, the kind of day that pretends neutrality while quietly taking notes. I drove to the memorial early, not because I like being first, but because I like knowing where to stand before a crowd decides for me. The square sits between the library and the post office, a practical patch of grass edged by sidewalks that have learned the weight of parades and grief. Flags lined the path, their fabric stiff in the morning air. A brass quintet warmed up with careful notes that sounded like apologies. My father's truck pulled in 5 minutes later than he said it would. Some habits are structural. He parked crooked, corrected again. When he stepped out, he had shaved. His tie was quiet. That alone told me he understood this wasn't a stage. We stood near the back. He didn't grab my arm. He didn't steer me. He stood beside me like proximity was something you practiced. The mayor said the expected things. Names were read. An older Marine saluted with a hand that trembled and a jaw that didn't. When the anthem began, my father placed his hand over his heart without theatrics. He didn't look at me, but he didn't look away from the flags either. Afterward, people drifted. A woman in scrubs balanced a toddler on her hip and thanked me for my service with a voice that meant it. A man from my father's bowling league cleared his throat and said, "Heard about the dinner." My father answered before I could. She didn't give a speech, he said. She set a standard. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. Progress is sometimes subtract. At his truck, he lingered. Coffee, he asked, like it was a truce. Sure, I said. We went to the diner where the booths remember elbows. The waitress poured without asking regular, she said to him. He nodded. To me, she said black. I smiled. People notice things. We ate in a quiet that wasn't hostile. He talked about copper prices, about a kid at the shop who over-tightened a valve and learned humility the honest way. I told him about a sparrow that bullied a blue jay off my feeder and won. He frowned, then laughed once, surprised. Metaphors arrive whether you invite them or not. You going back soon? He asked. Yes, I said. There's always work. He nodded. Figures. The phone started ringing that afternoon. Not for me, for him. I could tell by the way he stiffened, by the way he took calls outside and returned with his jaw set. When he finally said something, it came out sideways. Your aunt wants to know why I never mentioned what you do. I sipped my coffee. What did you tell her? That it wasn't my story, he said, testing the phrase. And that I ask. That'll do, I said. At home, the house settled around me. I lined vases from the dinner with water and watched flowers bow their heads like they'd stayed up too late. I set my phone face down. The truth doesn't need replies. Messages came anyway. Old friends, former classmates, some proud, some apologetic, a few curious in the way curiosity becomes when it's decided you owe it something. I answered none of the questions that wanted details. I answered one that didn't. Glad you're okay, it read. I wrote back, I am. That night, my father came by with tomatoes from a neighbor's garden. He set them on the counter with a paper towel under them so they wouldn't spot the surface. You got salt? He asked. We ate standing up. He opened the screen door slowly so it wouldn't slam. Consideration is a dialect. He didn't say he was proud. That word may never live comfortably in his mouth. But when he left, he turned off the porch light instead of letting it burn all night. Energy costs money. Attention costs more. The following week brought its own tests. A fundraiser called asking if I'd say a few words. I declined. A local paper left a voicemail. I deleted it. A man I didn't know approached me in the grocery store aisle and asked if it was all true. I looked at the canned tomatoes and said, truth doesn't improve with retelling. He nodded, chastened. My father struggled. I could see it in the way he reached for jokes and stopped himself in the way he sometimes filled silence with weather instead. He corrected himself, once caught a barb mid-flight and swallowed it. That mattered. Night Sentinel. He said one evening, not as a spectacle, but as a question. Does it ever stick? Sometimes, I said. Then you put it down. He considered that. I never put anything down. I know, I said. You can learn. He didn't argue. The town adjusted. At church, no one commented on my body. They used my name. At the hardware store, men who had once smirked now nodded. Respect can arrive late. It still arrives. On Thursday, my father called. There's a cookout Sunday, he said. Your brothers, I told them you're coming. I'll come, I said, if it stays civil. It will, he said quickly. Too quickly, then softer. I'll make it so. At the cookout, the men gathered around the grill like it was a campfire. Stories cycled. My father wandered over with a plate, nodded at the chicken, then turned to me. For a moment, the old script hovered. He cleared his throat. This is my daughter, he said. He paused. The pause mattered. She runs things bigger than this grill. She takes care of people. He set his plate down. That's all I'll say. It wasn't poetry. It was enough. Later, he sat beside me on the porch. I don't like being corrected in public, he said. I don't like being diminished in it, I said. He nodded fair. When I left, he handed me a jar of pickles. Figured you might like these. Apologies take many forms. That night, I packed for a flight. The familiar ritual steadied me, boots by the door, jacket on the hook. I slept without counting. In the morning, as I locked up, my phone buzzed. A text from my father, be safe. 2 words, no punctuation, no performance. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors that open the right way. We were learning which side of them we stood on. The weeks that followed settled into a pattern that felt earned, not easy earned. My father spoke less. When he did, he chose his words the way a man chooses steps on ice, careful testing, willing to pause. I noticed. Not because I was keeping score, but because change announces itself in small refusals to repeat old harm. I went back to work. The airfield greeted me with its honest smells, fuel, rubber, coffee burned by someone who forgot the pot. Checklists waited. Weather waited. Work has a way of holding you upright when the rest of life tilts. In the cockpit, there is no room for family mythology. The instruments don't care who raised you. They care whether you read them correctly. Nights returned. So did the rhythm climb. Settle. Watch. The world below arranged itself into patterns you could trust and patterns you couldn't. I kept watch. Others slept. That exchange still felt fair. When I came home again, the town looked the same and different at once. Familiar streets, new manners. At the post office, a man held the door and said nothing. At the diner, the waitress asked if I wanted my usual and didn't comment when I said yes. It was astonishing how much peace arrived when commentary left. My father called on a Wednesday. You free Saturday? He asked. Depends, I said. On what? There's a dedication, he said. New plaque at the memorial. Names from a unit that didn't get one before. He hesitated. I could use company. The phrasing mattered. He wasn't asking me to perform. He was asking me to stand. I'll come, I said. Saturday dawned bright enough to feel like an apology. We stood near the granite reading names, carved with the discipline of grief. A retired teacher held a flag pin between two fingers like it might float away. A Boy Scout in a sash tried to stand still and failed. The cloth came off the plaque. The crowd went quiet, the way crowds do when they remember what quiet is for. My father stood next to me without touching. When people approached, he let them. He didn't interrupt to translate me into smaller words. A man I didn't know shook my hand and said, "Thank you." My father nodded once, like he understood what that nod cost. On the walk back to his truck, he cleared his throat. "I've been mean my whole life," he said, not loud, not for effect. "You've been afraid," I said. Mean is how afraid dresses for work. He absorbed that eyes on the pavement. I don't know how to say sorry the right way. "Say it once," I said, "then say it again with your behavior." He nodded. "I can try." Trying has a sound. It sounds like stopping yourself mid-sentence. It sounds like asking a question and waiting for the answer. It sounds like not telling a joke because you're not sure it will land clean. We went for coffee. He talked about nothing and everything about a leaky valve, about the price of copper, about the neighbor's dog that wouldn't learn. He didn't ask for stories. He didn't ask about the name. He didn't need to. He was learning where not to pull. Later that afternoon, he surprised me. "You want to show me?" he asked. "Show you what?" "What you do," he said. "Not details, just the shape of it." I considered. Boundaries aren't fixed, they're measured. "I can show you the simulator," I said, "the part that's meant to be shown." He smiled, relieved. That'd be something. At the base, I watched him take in the hangar, its scale, its order. He moved carefully like a guest in a church. When the instructor ran through the briefing, my father listened without interrupting. In the simulator, the horizon did its disappearing trick. My father's hands tightened on the armrests. "That's nothing like I thought," he said when it ended. "Most things aren't," I said. He nodded. "I used to think courage was loud." "So did I said. "It's not." On the drive home, he was quiet. At a stoplight, he glanced at me. "Night Sentinel," he said, not asking, not joking, just naming. "Yes," I said. "I use it," he added quickly. "Not unless you say." "That's good," I said. "Thank you." He exhaled like he'd set something down he'd been carrying without knowing it was heavy. The test came as tests do when we weren't ready. A family dinner, too many people, too much history. The old grooves waited like ruts in a road. Someone made a comment about my work, half curious, half dismissive. My father opened his mouth, closed it, looked at me. "She flies," he said, and left it there. It wasn't perfect. It was progress. After dinner, as dishes clinked and people drifted, he pulled me aside. "If I mess up," he said, "tell me, not in front of everyone." "I will," I said, "and if you don't stop, I'll leave." He nodded. "Fair." That night, I slept easily. In the morning, he texted, "You home yet?" I replied, "Yes." A minute later, coffee later, I smiled. Reconciliation doesn't sound like trumpets. Sometimes it sounds like an invitation that doesn't demand. At the shop a few days later, I returned a socket set I'd borrowed. He took it, marked the pieces that were his the way he always had. "You always did that neat," he said, then stopped himself. "I mean, thanks." "You're welcome," I said. He looked at me, really looked. "I'm trying," he said. "I see it," I said. The hardest part of change isn't the first apology. It's the 100 small decisions that follow it. He was making them, so was I. When I left, he stood in the doorway and watched me go. He didn't call out, he didn't joke. He lifted a hand, then dropped it. The radio played something old and honest. In the air that night, the horizon vanished again. Instruments glowed. I kept watch. Somewhere below, a town slept with new manners. The ground offered no surprises. The work held. Home is the place you practice landings you don't get graded on. We were still practicing, and for the first time that felt like enough. By late summer, the heat had softened into something that forgave you for lingering outside. Evenings stretched. Mornings apologized for themselves. The town had folded the dinner into its memory the way towns do filed it under things we learned without meaning to. At the diner, people stopped asking questions. At church, they stopped whispering. They used my name. Respect can arrive late. It still arrives. My father stayed quiet for a while after the plaque dedication. Not distant quiet. There's a difference. He called when he said he would. He showed up when he said he would. When he didn't know what to say, he didn't say anything. Silence used correctly can be an act of care. One evening, he came by with a sack of peaches and set them on the counter. "They bruise easy," he said, like it was a confession. He washed his hands before touching anything. He noticed the flight jacket on the hook and didn't comment. He noticed the boots by the door and didn't ask. Consideration has a shape. It looks like restraint. We sat on the porch with the radio low. Fireflies made small decisions in the yard. He cleared his throat. I've been thinking, he said. That's dangerous, I said, smiling. He smiled back, tentative. I used to think being a father meant toughening you up so the world couldn't hurt you. And now I asked. And now I think the world was never the problem, he said. I was. We let that sit. Not every truth needs a reply. A week later, at a neighborhood cookout, someone new asked the old question, the one that used to arrive wrapped in a smirk. So, what do you do? He said, casual, curious, a little dismissive. I waited. My father was closer to the grill than I was. He looked at me, then back at the man. She flies, he said. No flourish, no joke, and she keeps people safe. The man nodded. Well, he said, properly chastened. Thank you. My father didn't watch my face for approval. He flipped a burger and let the smoke do its work. Later, as dusk settled, he handed me a plate and said, you want the corner, less char. It was a small thing. It mattered. Work took me away again. It always does. The airfield greeted me with its familiar truths. Nights returned. Weather argued. I watched the horizon disappear and reappear patient as a heartbeat. There were moments when the old reflex rose, the instinct to be invisible, to keep everything I was from becoming something someone else could mishandle. I let the reflex pass. You don't have to erase yourself to stay safe. You can draw lines. When I came home, my father had fixed the screen door. It no longer slammed. He'd noticed. He'd cared enough to do something about it. On Sundays, we sat beneath the same stained glass wheat and water pouring color across our shoulders. After the benediction in the parking lot that had hosted so much humiliation, a man from my father's bowling league said, heard your girl's doing important work. My father lifted his chin. She is, he said, and she doesn't need me to explain it. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. There were still rough edges. There always are. He slipped once, reached for a joke out of habit, then stopped himself mid-sentence. Sorry, he said simply. He meant it. Apologies don't need decoration. One afternoon, he asked if I'd walk with him to the memorial. We read names. He traced a letter with his finger. These rings, he said, nodding at my hand. I don't know what any of them mean. Each one is a story, I said. Not one is a joke. He nodded, absorbing. I'll remember that. That night, I stood in my kitchen and looked at a photograph from the dinner. Someone had slipped into an envelope candids from the edge of the room. In one, my glass is raised. The light finds me the way light should, not as a spotlight, but as a window. I set the photo beside one of my mother holding me as an infant. Both of us serious, both practicing how to be seen without asking permission. My father didn't become a different man overnight. He became a quieter one. He learned to ask before telling, to listen before laughing, to keep his hands to himself on words, on stories, on me. That is not a small thing. It is a lifetime's work begun late and done honestly. We still disagree. We still misstep. Boundaries still get named out loud from time to time, but the weather has changed. The climate, maybe. Respect has moved in and started paying rent. On my last night home, before another stretch away, he walked me to the door. Be safe, he said. And this time he added, glad you are who you are. It wasn't the word he'd withheld for decades. It was better. It was true. In the air, the horizon vanished again. Instruments glowed. I kept watch. Somewhere below, a town slept with new manners. The work held. So did I. I don't tell this story to humiliate my father. I tell it to honor what can grow in rocky soil. Words are tools. Used carelessly, they cut. Used well, they build. Parents, grandparents, anyone with a voice that carries. Remember this, what you say in public can wound for decades, or it can heal in an instant. You get to choose. As for me, I no longer wait for my work to be announced over a microphone. Honor isn't given by introductions. It's lived in the way you carry yourself when the lights are on you and when they aren't. The greatest revenge isn't humiliation returned. It's dignity kept until the world has no choice but to learn it. If you stayed with me to the end, thank you for listening. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment and tell me. If this story touched something in you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. We have many more stories like this to share. So subscribe if you'd like to keep walking this road with us. Let's keep choosing respect together.